Well, good morning and welcome to Sunday Morning Coffee with Dr. Childress. Today I have one of my Mount Rainier mugs. Each one of my coffee mugs has a different association with it. This one is down from Mount Rainier. Um, I am I'm telling you, I'm loving the mountains and trees up here. It is for me, this is an idyllic place to be. And holy cow, they have the ocean up here. I'm living on an island in the middle of Puget Sound, and the ocean is everywhere. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in the ocean, the Southern California beaches. And for me to be around the ocean and trees and mountains, I am a happy human. Last Friday, I testified in a matter, and those are exhausting for me. I'm an old guy now, and testimony gets us adrenaline boost. It's not hard; it's just stressful because of the adrenaline thing. And so then Saturday or the day after, it typically takes me like a full day to recover from the adrenaline burst of that. So I sleep a lot. And so I'm just kind of coming out of that on Sunday morning here, coming back to the world, the rest of you, and so I was wondering about what to talk to you about today over coffee, and I thought I would invite you into the officer's tent, basically, where I see things standing right now, and what I'm doing, and where the battle is raging on the different parts of the battlefield, and what's going on with stuff. So I'm not quite sure where I'm headed. I do kind of. We'll be talking about the forensic psychologists and what's happening in that domain because that's the where the real action is happening. Um, the Gardner PAS people are a sideshow. Um, Pretty much everything else at this point is a sideshow. It's all over on forensic psychology. The I understand where everybody else is because you're all for the parents, you're all trying to solve a situation in your specific family. You're trying to protect your child. This is the most important thing in your life going on right now, and that that has your entire focus. What do you do about your family? The problem with that is that the systems around you are broken, the mental health system and the legal system. And the reason the legal system is broken is because the mental health system is broken and it's not getting the proper information into the courts. And so when the two systems are broken, then there's no solution for the parents who are in those systems. And so we first have to fix the broken systems, and then we will have solutions for the parents in those systems. The problem is the parents who are currently in the broken systems are all focused on trying to solve that situation, and nobody's focused on solving the system. I am. And so that's what I've been doing for the past decade is basically fixing the mental health system so we can get a fixed legal system out of this. And we're on a linear path, so we're not going. When I arrived here, everybody was just going around in circles, and so I've kind of adjusted that and put us on a linear path. It's moving in a direction, and it's moving in a direction that's going to solve the situation. And there are things that happen along that path. I call them cairns, CAIRNS. It comes from backpacking. It comes from the wilderness kind of stuff, where when you lose a trail and you can't see the trail, a lot of times that's like for me, it was up in the backcountry when you're a tree line and you're walking across rock. There's no dirt for the trail. So where's the trail as you're walking across mountaintops? And what people do is they put up a pile of stones called cairn. And so when you lose a trail, you look around and look for where the next cairn, and you start walking from these piles of rocks to the piles of rocks to get you back and locate where the trail starts again. And so As I move through this process in the family courts, I see various things come by, and I say, "Okay, there's a Karen. There's one." Recently, just over this past week, um, I responded to the Family Justice Council draft guidelines for how to respond to allegations of parental alienation. Um, First off, there's no such thing as parental alienation, so we need to up the standard of practice right there. But then I went through them line by line and have posted that up on my sent it to them. They invited the consultation, public consultation, so they invited. I answered, so I sent that to them, and then posted my response up on my consulting website. And so that can be also that's my response to like everything. And so it's sort of a general response. So if you ask me for my consultation on, parental alienation, what to do in the family courts, that's going to be my recommendation to a large measure. Um, and what I did was I went through line by line, on what they said, because the problematic issues in the current mindset are so dense. I can't kind of skip stuff. I gotta go through line by line because each line is problematic. And that's exactly what I do with the custody evaluations too, the forensic custody evaluations. So this is kind of a little bit the my response to the Family Justice Council guidelines is a little bit of an example of what I do in my consulting practice. You get a custody evaluation, I go through them line by line. What I will do next, though, what I didn't do for the Family Justice Council, but what I will do, hopefully this week as well, is I'm going to create a summary report off of that. But the summary report is going to reference the line by line reviews. So if you have any questions about why I came up with this summary statements, you can go back and see directly in the line by line analysis why I say what I do. And I'm going to pull basically the structures, the meme structures, I call them, the idea structures, the headings and content, such as participation in child abuse and spousal abuse. There's a section that about that. I'll pull that out and put it into the summary report and bring all these things out. One of the primary things that is going to be you're going to be seeing from me a lot, one of the primary meme structures or idea structures, we need a clinical diagnostic assessment to guide our treatment, and we have diagnostic questions. And so those are the yes no questions, either the targeted parents abusing the child or the allied parents abusing the child. Do we have a persecutory delusion? Do we have spousal abuse using the child as a weapon? All these questions need an answer, yes or no. So that's where the current state of things are. So you'll see those meme structures, those ideas moving more forward more. And what's happening as a clinical psychologist, I'm fixing the structures around you, the systems, in order to get you the proper mental health support that you need to protect your children. So, right now, what I would typically want to do is I refer to the psychologists around you to get an assessment for child abuse, but you have around you, you have these forensic psychology people, Stahl and Simon and Stahl and all the rest of them, who don't diagnose pathology. They do something different. So you don't have capable and competent mental health services in the family court, and that's just a fact. So I'm working to get that, but there's all sorts of barriers to treatment on that. Um, Primarily, what's happening overall with all of you is our ideas then determine how we see things. So if we have the idea that it's parental alienation, we see parental alienation or don't see it or whatever. Well, we see what our ideas allow us to see. If we add an idea of a persecutory delusion and a shared person, all of a sudden we can see something different. Oh my goodness, yeah, a persecutory delusion, a factitious disorder imposed on another, yeah, cross-generational coalition, yeah. The moment we have the ideas to see, we can then see the symptoms, we can see the features. And that's standard 2.04. That's of the APA ethics code. That's why we apply the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline. Those are the ideas that allow us to see what the pathology is and then know how to treat it off that. But if we don't apply the established knowledge, then we're just making stuff up and just guessing, and that's how we wind up in this situation. So what I did when I first arrived here, I did about 2 years of just sort of analysis of the situation, reading all the literature on parental alienation and what you guys are doing over here. And part of that is I went out and got um, Stahl and Simon's book on forensic psychology, consultation, and child custody litigation, a handbook for work product review, case presentation, and expert testimony. So it's published by the family law uh, or the family law section of the American Bar Association. So this is published by the American Bar Association. It's about how to do forensic custody evaluations, and it explained. So I went out and got their book and said, "What do you guys think you're doing?" And chapter 2 was very illuminating about that's where they give their justification for the field of forensic psychology, and it's flawed. There's some real problems with their justifications. Then in 2020, they produced their second edition of that, reversed authors. So this one's Simon and Stahl, Stahl and Simon. So these are like the two books published by the American Bar Association that talk about how to do forensic custody evaluations. Now we have the New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic Custody Evaluations that calls this, what they're doing, that it lacks scientific or legal value, that it's harmful to children, that it potentially results in disastrous consequences for parents and children, that they produce deficient or defective reports based on ideas of dubious quality, and that they voted 11 and 9 to discontinue the practice of doing this. They called it dangerous to children. Well, holy cow, you guys are the ones that are proposing this. You are the ones who are responsible for this experiment that you've been conducting on parents. And that's what it is. These guys and the other forensic psychologists, the Association of Family Conciliation Courts, AFCC, all of the forensic psychologists or have conducted an experiment on you. They came up with their ideas about doing something different, and they didn't tell you that you had options. They just gave you their one option of their experimental new approach to service delivery. And it wound up destroying the lives of thousands of children and thousands of parents over decades of time. And it just has totally degraded the quality of mental health services in the family courts and has resulted in the broken legal system response because the mental health system is broken. And this is the broken system right here. So these guys, Stahl and Simon. So I'm going to be looking into them more. That's sort of my next focus. I'm going to do a fireside chat on the Vita series for Stahl and Simon. I'm going to start with chapter 2 of their books. They say the same thing both times. But I'll highlight that and bring that out. So I'll start with talking about what they say and the justification for the forensic custody evaluation, the whole field of forensic psychology, that they disagree with the clinical approach. They make that very clear. They call it the clinical mindset versus the forensic mindset, and they elevate the forensic mindset in their fantasies and create a straw man argument against clinical psychology. And I'll take that all apart in a couple of fireside chats, and then I'll turn to their Vitas, and we'll take a look at Stahl and Simon's Vitas. And as I look at them, you can go and get them online. I'm not seeing that they have background in the diagnostic assessment of delusional thought disorders. So they're practicing beyond the boundaries of their competence right there in violation of 2.01. They're not competent in the very pathology that they're opining on, nor do I see that they're competent in attachment pathology. That would be early childhood mental health or any sort of attachment. And they're treating, we're diagnosing or working with an attachment pathology. So I don't see that Stahl and Simon are competent in two domains of knowledge that they need. They got the personality disorder pathology, family systems, factitious disorder. And so they may be competent in conducting their made up approach to doing something, but they're not competent in actual domains of knowledge necessary to work with the pathology. Holy Toledo. So you got the top people here recommending and creating this whole field who are not competent with the pathology they're working with, and they don't care. So 2.01 violation, they're also in violation of 2.03, maintaining competence, because they were never competent to begin with, and they're not getting competent in the assessment of delusional thought disorders or attachment pathology or anything else. Now, I am, you can look at my Vita, I'm competent in 6 domains of knowledge, and go up to my consulting website. I have a handout on describes it. Attachment pathology, delusional thought disorders, family systems, factitious disorder, complex trauma and child abuse, and court-involved pathology. So I am competent in this pathology, and they're not. And that's just a fact. And so I'd say they're in violation of 2.01 of the APA Ethics Code. I haven't seen one of their custody evaluations yet. I've seen others. Won't be long probably before I do see one. It'll come into my consulting practice, and I'll do a line by line on it, just like I did with the Family Justice Council guidelines. I'll just go through the custody evaluations line by line. That takes a long time. It's really intensive, but that serves as then my Appendix 1 for the summary report. I will be looking for, as in all custody evaluations, all mental health reports, the application of the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline, standard 2.04. Then you'll look at the Vita and say, where did they acquire their competence in the assessment of delusional thought disorders and attachment pathology, family systems, complex trauma, factitious disorders. Where did they acquire their competence in real things? And they didn't. If you look at the Vitas, you'll see they're very narrow. They just do forensic psychology. They have no experience with anything else. And so they're highly focused, very narrow, and that makes them very vulnerable to that violation of professional competence. But the moment that the field of forensic psychology and the licensing boards and the APA and everybody recognizes that these are awful, New York Blue Ribbon Commission on Forensic Custody Evaluations, that they lack scientific and professional value or legal value, and that they're dangerous and potentially disastrous consequences for children. The moment they realize that, then holy cow, the last 40 years of doing these has been destructive, massively destructive. And all of a sudden, everybody wakes up because they have a new idea. They're not trusting these people and what they've developed anymore. They're coming with a critical eye to look at what exactly are you telling people to do here? Uh-oh. They left being doctors is basically what it is. They stopped diagnosing and treating pathology. They said, we don't do the clinical psychology stuff. We do something different. We're involved in the courts. They're mini judges. And once they stop diagnosing, once the doctors stop diagnosing what the problem is, what the pathology is, then that forces the court to have to diagnose what the pathology is. And the court's not trained in that. And so they get these reports that don't do anything. And if going back to the Family Justice Council and those questions, what are the differential diagnosis that needs to happen? We need that for treatment. Okay, so independent about what these people think about custody and everything, we're ultimately going to need to treat the pathology in the family. The child's got an attachment problem, so let's fix it. and we're going to need a diagnosis to do that. But if they don't produce a diagnosis from their 6 to 9 month, $20,000 to $40,000 forensic assessment, and that doesn't produce a diagnosis, well, then we still need another assessment for the diagnosis so we can do the treatment. So even after this assessment, we still need another one for possible child abuse to answer all those questions. So right off the top, I would say if you're getting a forensic custody evaluation, I would say don't do it. But because you're likely going to be bringing it to me for a second workup on it, but you get them the questions, the diagnostic. These are the questions we need answers to. Is a targeted parent abusing the child? Yes, no. Identify what it is. Alternatively, is the allied parent psychologically abusing the child by creating a shared persecutory delusion and factitious attachment pathology in the child? And is there a shared persecutory delusion? Is there a factitious attachment pathology? And is there spousal abuse of the targeted parent using the child as a weapon? Those questions need to be answered. Those are risk assessment questions for a dangerous pathology. Suicide, homicide, abuse, child abuse, spousal abuse, elder abuse. This is possible child abuse, possible spousal abuse. Both sides are making allegations. You need to get a proper risk assessment on this. That's clinical psychology. And that's what Stahl and Simon say, and Simon and Stahl say they don't do. And we'll cover that. But holy cow, if these guys are in violation of ethical standards, then everybody who's following these guys are in violation of ethical standards. And because of that, no one's competent over here except me. And so no one's competent in working with this pathology. That's going to be a problem for the field. And so that's, as we're looking at the battlefield here, what's happening is ideas are changing. And what I have done is by defining the pathology entirely using established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline, I activated the APA ethics code. I activated standard 2.04, 2.01, 2.03, and 9.01, the variety, and harm as well, 3.04. So we have a variety of ethical standards that were activated the moment we switched from defining the pathology as parental alienation, that there's no such thing, there's no competence for that. It's just a made up stuff. And so there's no criteria for which to hold the mental health person accountable for that. But the moment with foundations that I define the pathology using established scientific and professional knowledge, then all of a sudden they have to know delusional thought disorders, they have to know attachment pathology, they have to know complex trauma and child abuse, personality disorders, factitious disorders, and so family systems. So they need to know a wealth of information once we define the pathology using professional knowledge. That's what I found when I first got here, is we had this parallel process of all the mental health people fighting about the pathology and everybody siding up on things. And one of the features, we had the Gardner PAS, parental alienation people, saying we want a new form of pathology in the DSM-5 for parental alienation. That's what this is, this new form of pathology with new symptoms. And we have establishment psychology and establishment legal professionals who are saying, no, that diagnostic model is awful, awful, awful. And it is. I don't care what the pathology is. The diagnostic model of PAS is an awful model for a diagnosis. So it's dead on arrival as a diagnostic system. And so basically the pathology captivated this group, and it's given you the worst possible diagnostic model to prove. Just awful. And you have to prove it in court to a judge at trial. Oh my God, that's almost, so that's bait is what it is. It's the pathogen. The pathology gave parents bait to keep them occupied so that they wouldn't develop an effective solution towards this. And so it kept everybody occupied. And so the arguments against parental alienation by the establishment psychologists are absolutely valid. There's no research support to it. It's a made up thing. It's an awful diagnostic model. However, there is a pathology over here. And so everybody's fighting about how to define it. Both of them failed their obligations. The Gardner PAS people should have taken the constructive feedback from establishment psychology and applied the established knowledge like I did. Family systems, attachment, personality disorders, delusional thought disorders, complex trauma. Apply the established knowledge. And it comes out, you work it out. It's, the attachment based model of parental alienation. It's cross-generational coalition, emotional cutoff. It's a shared induced persecutory delusion by a collapsing narcissistic borderline dark personality parent. And so it's entirely explainable and diagnosable from the applied knowledge. That's what the Gardner experts should have done. Somebody like Bill Burnett, he's a psychiatrist. So I would challenge, he's not competent in attachment pathology, but he should be competent in delusional thought disorders. He's a psychiatrist. But a shared delusion was in the DSM-4 the entire time, a shared psychotic disorder, shared delusion. And he never diagnosed that because he was so focused on this new pathology he thought he was creating, discovering parental alienation syndrome. And he's been so captivated by that, he didn't apply the established knowledge from the DSM-5. If you apply the established knowledge, you get a shared persecutory delusion. I'll cite to Walters and Friedlander, who cite back to me, that this is shared person, at least needs to be assessed. And it's child psychological abuse in the DSM-5. So diagnose that. Stop making up new pathology, apply knowledge. But they didn't do that because they don't know the established knowledge. And so people, Burnett and Gottlieb and then you have the researchers, Amy Baker and Harmon and people, but all the PAS people failed to take the feedback they were getting and apply knowledge. They failed to know the knowledge, 2.01 boundaries of competence. They failed to apply the knowledge, 2.04 bases for scientific professional judgments. And so they just didn't care about ethics. They didn't care about the quality of services they were delivering. They just wanted to be experts in something, which I find problematic as humans. But so you have that side. Alternatively, though, the establishment psychologists did the same failure because they're saying, oh, you didn't apply the established knowledge. Well, fine. You apply the established knowledge then. The forensic psychologists should have applied Bowlby and Mnuchin and Beck and Tronick and the established knowledge of professional psychology to the evaluations of these families. But they didn't because they separated from clinical psychology. And I've got the quotes in here that say, we're not using any of the things we learned in graduate school. So they exempted themselves from the application of knowledge because they do something different. They're in the family courts and they're not a doctor like the clinical psychologists are. That was a bad thing to do. And so I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a doctor. I diagnose and treat pathology. I don't make custody recommendations. In the absence of child abuse, parents have the right to parent according to their cultural values, personal values, and religious values. And in the absence of child abuse, each parent should have as much time and involvement with the child as possible. So the question becomes, is there child abuse? The concern when a child's rejecting a parent, that level of severity to the attachment pathology, there's a concern for abusive range parenting. So let's get a proper risk assessment to the appropriate differential diagnosis for each parent. Is the targeted parent abusing the child in some way? Let's diagnose it, put it on a treatment plan, and fix it. Is the allied parent psychologically abusing the child, creating a shared persecutory delusion, false factitious attachment pathology? Let's diagnose it and get it on a treatment plan and fix it. Whatever the problem is, let's diagnose it, put it on a treatment plan and fix it. We always repair breached attachment. The worst thing we can do is leave an attachment bond unrepaired. Um, so we don't want these children developing mommy issues and daddy issues for the rest of their adult life because we didn't fix an attachment pathology in childhood. To fix it, we need a diagnosis. We need to return to clinical psychology. So, but now everybody in the family courts, the parents are focused on their individual situation. The mental health people are ignorant and incompetent, so they're doing this stuff. And the lawyers and the legal system doesn't see the problems coming out of the mental health system, doesn't see the low quality of services they're getting because they're legal professionals. They expect, well, they've got doctor degrees. Look, the American Bar Association published an approach that the New York Blue Ribbon Commission found was dangerous to children. Okay, that's what they say. Get the quotes up and you can look at them. That's harmful to children, lacks scientific or legal value. And the American Bar Association is publishing this and telling people that this is what we should be doing. So the legal system doesn't understand the low quality of mental health services it's receiving from professional psychology, but they will. And that's going to split the forensic psychologists who have been buddy with the legal system and attorneys. Is going to split them. And the attorneys in the legal profession, is because they've had 40 years of experience with these ignorant, incompetent, and unhelpful forensic custody evaluations. They're going to say, we want something better. Dr. Childress can give us a diagnosis of child abuse one way or the other, and whether that's a shared delusion, and give us a treatment plan to fix the situation. Let's do that instead of this. And so you'll hear the same refrains I made about the Gardner PAS people back in 2017, as I was trying to get them on board and saying, come on, let's switch to a new paradigm of applying established knowledge, and let's PAS, that parental alienation, has to go. It's done. It's 40 years. Parental alienation as a construct has solved nothing and has resulted in exactly the situation we're looking at: the low quality of professional services, the absence of accountability in professional services, unethical practice, just a nightmare in the family courts. No solution, no treatment, and that's the direct result of using parental alienation as a construct. 40 years, no solution. Scoreboard. It's done. Look at the scoreboard. Who won? Who lost? PAS lost. Pathology won. Done. 40 years. We need to move off of that. We need to move to a different approach. And the approach we move to is applying established knowledge, which is what we should have been doing this entire time. Ethical standards 2.01, 2.04, 2.03. Apply the ethical standards. Let's get standards back in the family courts. They've been dropped to zero. We need to get them back. So ethical standards of practice 2.01. Get the doctors back, diagnosis and treatment, and get out of the business of being mini judges and trying to decide on custody. That's a symptom. It's not a custody conflict. This is a pathology. Custody's easy peasy. One parent, the pathological parent, wants to move this into the courts because making it about custody is a way of abusing the targeted parent and making it really hard for them to see their child, making them prove, that they deserve to be a parent and stuff. It's a weapon of spousal abuse, and these psychologists believe it because that's how bad they are as clinical psychologists. They don't see that the custody is a false issue. It's about pathology, and they are being moved into the false pathology. If you believe a shared delusion, you become part of the shared delusion. You become part of the pathology. When the pathology is child abuse, you become part of the child abuse. Okay, so I don't know what to tell you. It is what it is here. So both sides of the mental health system, the Gardner PAS people, the forensic psychologists, and here, these, just like PAS needs to die, forensic custody evaluations need to die, because they're flip sides of the same professional parallel process. So the professionals are locked into this false argument. There's PAS, no, there's not. And then with custody evaluations, and is it parental? It's all a false argument. It's pathology. It needs a diagnostic risk assessment for possible child abuse. One way or the other, we're getting allegations out of that. And we got to get back to the clarity of healthcare, the clarity of diagnosis and treatment, because everything lands on treatment. We have to fix it. So everything lands on treatment. The reason we need a diagnosis is because we need to know if we're treating cancer or diabetes. So diagnosis guides treatment. So what's the diagnosis? And then we have a differential diagnosis. Then we collect the information that allows us to make that diagnosis. Then we return that diagnosis to the court, so the court has an accurate diagnosis to then base its decisions on. And hopefully, clinical psychology will present a treatment plan to fix things. The court says, yeah, we agree with that treatment plan here, so let's implement that. And when we implement that, we will fix the pathology. There's only two causes of failed treatment: misdiagnosis, and we're treating cancer with insulin, or you're not competent in the delivery of the intervention for that diagnosis. Because if you have an accurate diagnosis and you're competent in the delivery of the intervention for that diagnosis, then you'll fix the problem. Okay, so if it's not getting fixed by your treatment, you got either a problem in your diagnosis or a problem in your treatment. And I would look first to your problem in your diagnosis, and you look for any barriers to treatment. You got an accurate diagnosis, but you haven't diagnosed some barriers to treatment, and you need to get rid of those barriers, or you fundamentally misdiagnosed it. It's cancer, and you're trying to treat with insulin. So, and when child abuse is a considered diagnosis, our diagnosis needs to be accurate 100% of the time. Because if with this pathology, if you believe a shared delusion, you become part of the shared delusion. You become part of the pathology. You become part of the child abuse by communicating to the child that their delusional beliefs have a reality base to them when they don't. They're symptoms. And so you become a participant, called the bystander, a participant in the child abuse. And for these psychologists, the forensic psychologists, that bystander role, there's abusive parent, victimized child, protective parent, and the bystander. That's your classic pattern of child abuse. And for these bystanders, their role is in active trauma treatment out in the field. Their role is called the betrayer role, typically occupied by the mother in sex abuse who sacrifices a child to save her marriage. She's the one who should protect the child from sexual abuse, but doesn't. She sacrifices a child to save her marriage. That's called the betrayer role. It's the one who should protect and doesn't. That's the role of the psychologists in the family courts. We have two potential dangerous pathologies: child abuse and spousal abuse, using child as a weapon. We're the ones with duty to protect obligations. We should be protecting the child and the parent based on the application of knowledge, and they are failing. So, they're supposed to protect the child and they don't. That's the betrayal. And so that my focus in the family courts is not necessarily your focus. I am working one by one with you at this point. Prior to this, I've been working more getting the gears in place, getting the information sets in place for the change to happen. And once the change happens, forensic psychology is going to collapse out of the family courts. It's because it's a broken system. It doesn't work. And hopefully we'll get some accountability to the folks who developed this experiment and destroyed the lives of thousands of children with their failed approach. But there will be no competent services in the family courts. There never were. But it'll be more obvious now because the forensic psychologists are awful. And the clinical psychologists, like myself, won't work in the family courts because it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous for Dr. Childress to work in the family courts. And, you can see that. And so this whole issue of developing this experiment was a risk management response to how dangerous the pathology was in the family courts. So it was risk management in the 1980s because the pathology was dangerous. Plus, you had the parallel process in the psychology field of fighting about the child. And so the approach, the risk management approach and solution they came up with was to develop a subspecialty practice and gave them carte blanche to do whatever they wanted, and they did bad things. So we need to close off this experiment, but revisit the issue of the risk management response and how we approach that. We need to get clinical psychologists back. The problem there is that no clinical psychologists are competent in the family courts. The delusional thought disorder assessment is over in your schizophrenia people, but schizophrenia people don't work with childhood. They don't work with the trauma, attachment, pathology. They work with schizophrenia. The attachment knowledge is over in the 0 to 5 uh, subspecialty practice. That's the attachment system. But those attachment people aren't competent in the assessment of delusional thought disorders or personality disorders or family systems. And so all of the domains of clinical psychology aren't competent working with the family court pathology because they haven't been working for 40 years in this pathology. And so that's where I came over here with knowledge from schizophrenia, 12 years there. So I have that knowledge in delusional thought disorders, but I'm a child and family therapist working in complex trauma. It was just sort of serendipitous that during my master's degree, I got trained for 12 years on a schizophrenia project. Lucky, fortunate. I call them entanglements. You also call them synchronicities. But there's a pattern to my knowledge that is interesting. So I have that background. I also have 0 to 5, which is the attachment zone, plus complex trauma and child abuse. My clinic got our kids from Child Protective Services. So the clinical director, 3 university assessment treatment centers, children 0 to 5. Our referral source was from Child Protective Services. And that was interesting because we would get these 3-year-olds or 2-year-olds or even infants who were placed in foster care and were referred to into our clinic. These kids cannot report history. Okay. They can't tell us all the traumas that they've been through. And yet I have to come up with the treatment plan for fix what's going on. And so I have to do an assessment of what all the pathology is, what's happening in the brain systems, language systems, emotional regulation systems, the attachment systems, just cognitive systems, and how those are all interacting. I have to figure out what the problem is so I can come up with a treatment plan for that. So in terms of attachment pathology, you have people like researchers like Tronick or Crittenden or Fonagy or Lyons Ruth. You have all the researchers in attachment. Well, I'm one of the clinical application guys, but I'm right up there with them. Okay, that I know the knowledge they know, and I've been applying the knowledge they know, and I am like an attachment guy in the family courts. So there's a big article from all the attachment people, like 50 authors or something, attachment goes to court. And one of the kind of recommendations is you need to get attachment expertise into the family courts. Well, I am your clinical expertise in attachment. But I know for a fact you won't get anybody else. If my attachment people, the other clinicians, come out of early childhood into the family courts, they won't know personality disorders. They're not going to know the delusional thought disorders from a collapse of a personality disorder or how to treat that. And so there's no clinical psychologists who are competent to work in the family courts. The forensic psychologists are not competent, then they're going to collapse out. So then the court's going to have, and the families in the courts are going to have no competent mental health services in the family courts. So one of the features about that is, well, I'm going to have an interesting little consulting practice as being the only competent person in the family courts. So that will be one of the consequences. Another consequence, though, is either the clinical psychologists have to come back or the current crop of forensic psychologists have to go back to being clinical psychologists. And so these folks can either start listening to Dr. Childress and doing what Dr. Childress says, and or else they're going to flee because their license is at risk. 2.01, 2.04, failure in the duty to protect. And I'm roaming the family courts doing reports on their reports. And so if I get a report from Stahl or Simon, their license may be at risk for the negligent and uh, violations of ethical standards. Now, the licensing boards won't sanction forensic psychologists. Why not? And that's the reason everything's gotten so bad. There's no oversight of them because the forensic psychologists are allowed to self-review on the licensing boards. So if it comes in from the family courts, they give it to a forensic psychologist to review, and parents are not necessarily making the proper arguments about competence issues. That's why I've armed the parents. I've given you the tools and the weapons you need to hold them accountable on 2.01 and 2.04 and 2.03 and 9.01a. And I do that in my line by lines, and I do that in my reports that then um, can result in the board complaint, which is what happened in Oregon. Okay, I phrased the issue in my custody resolution method report to Dorsey that this could be possible child abuse. The dad used my report to file a licensing board complaint against the involved psychologist, the forensic psychologist person, and Oregon's licensing board sanctioned me. Dorsey's in California. I'm consulting to a business in California, and they extended their jurisdiction to sanction me for practice in Oregon without a license because my report resulted in a board complaint against the forensic psychologist. So the licensing boards are a danger to me because I'm exposing the incompetence that they should be sanctioning. So I'll talk about cairns and passing through cairns. This Family Justice Council report is a cairn, okay, and so the current sort of response would be my line by line notes. Now I'm going to do a summary report that pulls it out, and so that'll be kind of an example of what I do around most mental health reports, line by line, then supports that. In a custody report, though, I draw out the symptoms and diagnosis of pattern match to symptoms. So, boy, they do a good job of reporting symptoms, just not a good job of understanding what they mean. But if you pattern match the symptoms they report to the diagnostic criteria, it's pretty obvious what the pathology is. And then you just have to get the court to kind of make that link that the psychologist failed to do. Um, and we get it into treatment then, and then the treatment gets the diagnosis to support the court's concern. But ultimately, we need to kind of get the whole process fixed over in the mental health people. Um, but that's a cairn moving through. I didn't know who it was going to be. I didn't know where, how, when, why, but I know that these events will start popping up, and then I have to address them as they come through. The other cairn that I'm waiting for is at some point. I would recommend that the licensing boards have seminars from Dr. Childress for their forensic people or their court involved people on ethical standards of practice and on clinical psychology in the family courts to raise the level of competence in the family courts. But until that happens, I know that there's certain idea structures that are not in place yet. Okay. And so ideas are coming forward. And what's happening is attachment-based model of parental alienation, ABPA. We can call it Bob, brutally obstructed bonding. I don't care what you call it, but the application of established knowledge is they're going to encounter these ideas from established knowledge that they're going to have to integrate. They're going to have to address these ideas that are coming to them. And I think that's very elegant on my part, what I did with that, because I had to construct something that was new that would challenge their existing ideas and require them to reformulate how they approach things. So it has to be new. but it can't be new because then it has to pass Daubert and Kelly Fry stuff, and everybody's going to fight about this new theory of Dr. Childress. So it has to be new and not new at the same time. I call them twirly things. And I did that. So the application of knowledge is new, but it's not new. It's Bowlby, Minuchin, and Beck. It's the established knowledge. And so I love those little things, my little twirly things. Um, and so they're going to have to deal with that and incorporate that knowledge. The critical thing is getting that encounter with the knowledge. So the moment we present that knowledge, then we have the encounter that will then produce the response, the risk management response, the professional standards of practice response, the response to this new information. And that's where Bill Burnett and all the Gardner PAS people were so significantly unhelpful, is that they would not present the established psychology with a challenge with this alternative information. And so they kept everything locked up in this parental alienation argument for another additional 5 years that it didn't need to last that way. We could have been 5 years further advanced if they had come and support the encounter of these folks with established knowledge. Okay. But now we're here. Whether they tried to obstruct, they tried to delay, it didn't work because it's moving on a linear path. It just delayed things. So all the families we lost, I'm sorry, I was moving as fast as I could get things to move. But now we are at an actual confrontation, an actual encounter of the flawed, thought disordered mental health processes of the people in the family courts. And they are thought disordered. They're not linear and logical. They kind of move associational in places, from unresolved trauma in the people above who are making these ideas. So there's going to be an encounter of the thought disorder with actual knowledge, which will then require an integration. And it's that integration, it's the response we're looking for. Just to link a little bit into the world politics right now, when Hamas attacks Israel, they know Israel's going to do a response. They know what that's going to be, and so they are inviting that response. They know what's going to happen, and that's what they want. They want to set up the response of getting Israel into Gaza, and then it exposes them and does all this sort of stuff. So, and that's part of what I'm doing. I'm not looking to get people to believe me or be a wonderful expert or do I'm provoking a response to information sets, and it's the response that I'm looking for. What are they going to do about this information? I know what they're going to do about it, because I know the idea structures, the meme structures that are at play here. And the interesting part going forward for me is going to be looking at the meme structures of what I did, what the old meme structures were, what I did to confront them. Some memes are symbiotic, some memes are predatory. So this Family Justice Council report is a good look at the competing meme structures of various things. And so, but that's a meta that we will be able to get into later. Right now, we're in 2023, fall of 2023. I'm kind of working on things regarding my practice. I have to get licensed in Oregon, Washington, and I have to get safe in the family courts. And so I'm organizing that. But then 2024, I'm anticipating it's going to be lost to Trump and the political stuff, and he's going to suck all the oxygen from the room. So nothing's going to happen except a lot of conflict. And there will be some integrations beneath the surface of some of the encounters with information. But really, 2025 is when I'm looking for things to begin to open up more broadly and maybe get the paradigm shifts that are happening. United States is where I'm focused. And so hopefully we get a shift in the United States, and then that will ripple out to the other internationally. So, but someplace like England or Great Britain with Kafka's, they could make the shifts already. They could start making those shifts, or in the Netherlands or Scandinavia region, or the Balkans, Poland, wherever, Canada, can make the shifts, um, that are necessary. But more likely, what's going to happen is the United States will shift, and once the United States shift, the energy will move along the pathways that I've established, and that's what I'm doing. I'm establishing connections so that once the information sets start to move through, there's already pathways that I call them ports of entry. Actually, hooks. There's hooks that into the meme structures of the existing ideas. So you have a meme structure that hooks, but it has to have a port of entry to get there. And so there's all sorts of technical stuff that I'm doing, but I'm anticipating that it's going to flood on out at some point. But the mental health system in the U.S. is going to be faced with a problem. It's not the family courts are not going to have competent mental health services in the family courts. I suggest the AFCC invites me to come do some talks to their people. I'm not submitting to the AFCC. They're the evil empire. But if they once they become aware, if they invite me over, then I'll do that, and that would be a cairn indicating that the idea structures have reached a certain point of change. Licensing boards, I think, are the first ones. They should be asking Dr. Childress to come talk to their people, do an online presentation, online debate. That'll be another thing I'll be pushing forward. Is let's get an online debate of anybody who disagrees with Dr. Childress. Forensic psychology versus clinical psychology in the family courts. Whatever it is, whoever it is, let's get it up there. Let's get the information out into the public's arena, and let's start talking about it, because this 1980s, this is a failed model of service delivery to a vulnerable population. It's a failed experiment. So now let's revisit the issue with all this experience we now have, and come up with a better, not only a better, an effective approach to resolving the pathology in the family courts. We can do that with autism. We can do that with eating disorders. We can do that with substance abuse. Let's bring it into the family courts. We need to get research over here. And the whole account I could talk all about that. You have Dorsey Pruder, who's a businesswoman, conducting research in the family. Where are the researchers? Where are the universities? It's just an amazing patient abandonment by clinical psychology. That's what it is on our side. Clinical psychologists, they've just abandoned you. That's the second side of the betrayer. The ones who should protect and don't, the clinical psychologists should protect, but they've left the family courts. They've abandoned you to this awful group, as a passive aggressive thing. You're going to threaten our license? Here, have these folks, see how you like them. And then we left, the clinical psychologists, all the knowledge left. So on Meta, there's a whole bunch of very interesting things going on. So if you're following along with your secret decoder ring, there's all sorts of meme structures, idea structures that are encountering each other and shifting motivational networks, shifting conceptual networks, and collapsing things. We're going into a period of immense splitting, by the way. In case you didn't know from our political surroundings, we are in immense splitting. Everything's going to split. The AFCC is going to split the forensic psychologists from the family law attorneys. The psychology is going to be split, pro-Childress, anti-Childress. Everything's going to be splitting up. My side, your side kind of thing for a while, until we get that integration back again. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my Sunday and start getting back into my life, and we'll check into with you next week. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.